Welcome. This is A Course in Miracles Palm Beach Study Group. Tonight we're starting Chapter 9, The Acceptance of the Atonement. The first chapter of this first section, Section 1, The Acceptance of Reality. It's on page 183 in the book. On page 160. It's on page 160 in the text. Fear of the will of God is one of the strangest beliefs the human mind has ever made. It could not possibly have occurred unless the mind were already profoundly split, making it possible for it to be afraid of what it really is. Reality cannot threaten anything except illusions, since reality can only uphold truth. The very fact that the will of God, which is what you are, is perceived as fearful, demonstrates that you are afraid of what you are. It is not then the will of God of which you are afraid, but yours. Well, a key sentence here is saying that the will of God is what you are. Not who you are, but what you are, because you are a spiritual being. And the other thing about it is the word reality. You know, some people like to say, well, I know my body is real. I can see it. I can feel it, I am blah, 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 and what have you. But that's not the way the Course uses the word. The word reality is talking about spiritual reality. So when it says that the mind is split between the ego mind and the spirit mind, and that is afraid of what reality is, it's afraid of what spirit is. And then it says reality cannot threaten anything except illusions. In other words, the spirit doesn't threaten anything. But the ego feels threatened. The ego is the illusion. Spirit can only uphold truth. So if you're afraid of God or afraid of the will of God or afraid that God's going to punish you for being a naughty little boy or girl, all of that is just your ego thinking. And the only thing you're really being afraid of is yourself. Any questions, comments? Paragraph 2. Your will is not the ego's, and that is why the ego is against you. What seems to be the fear of God is really the fear of your own reality. It is impossible to learn anything consistently in a state of panic. If the purpose of this course is to help you remember what you are, and if you believe that what you are is fearful, then it must follow that you will not learn this course. Yet the reason for the course is that you do not know what you are. And the course is for teaching you what you are, and what you are is a child of God. You are a spiritual being. So when it says your will is not the ego's, it's saying your spiritual will is not the ego's. There's two different wills playing here. We have a split mind. Questions, comments? Paragraph 3. If you do not know what your reality is, why would you be so sure that it is fearful? The association of truth and fear, which would be highly artificial at most, is particularly inappropriate in the minds of those who do not know what truth is. All this could mean is that you are arbitrarily associating something beyond your awareness with something you do not want. It is evident then that you are judging something of which you are totally unaware. You have set up this strange situation so that it is impossible to escape from it without a guide who does know what your reality is. The purpose of this guide is merely to remind you of what you want. He is not attempting to force an alien will upon you. He is merely making every possible effort within the limits you impose on him to reestablish your own will in your awareness. And so he's talking about the Holy Spirit here. The Holy Spirit is making every possible efforts within the limits you impose upon him, because the Spirit will not impose itself on you. You have to accept it. You have to ask for the guidance. You have to accept the guidance. You have to let Spirit in. So he's not attempting to force an alien will upon you. He's merely making every possible effort to reestablish your own spiritual will into your conscious awareness. Questions, comments? Paragraph 4. You have imprisoned your will beyond your own awareness, where it remains, but cannot help you. When I said that the Holy Spirit's function is to sort out the true from the false in your mind, I meant that he has the power to look into what you have hidden and recognize the will of God there. His recognition of this will can make it real to you because he is in your mind, and therefore he is your reality. If then his perception of your mind brings its reality to you, he is helping you to remember what you are. The only source of fear in this process is what you think you will lose. Yet it is only what the Holy Spirit sees that you can possibly have. The fear of what we will lose, that we're going to lose our body, that we're going to lose our money, that we're going to lose our status, that we're going to lose all of our ego illusions. All of those things are illusions, they're dreams. They don't exist in the first place, but we're afraid of losing them because we're so caught up in the ego mind. But the Holy Spirit knows better. And so it's doing its best to remind you of what you are. Any questions, comments? Paragraph 5. I have emphasized many times that the Holy Spirit will never call upon you to sacrifice anything. But if you ask the sacrifice of reality of yourself, the Holy Spirit must remind you that this is not God's will because it is not yours. There is no difference between your will and God's. If you did not have a split mind, you would recognize that willing is salvation because it is communication. So when it says that God's will is ours, God's will is our true spiritual will because we're the Son of God and there's only one of us. We and our Father are one, and we and our brothers are one. And there's only one will. But while we're trapped in ego thinking and ego mind, we don't see that. We see us and them. There's me and there's the other. It's split. That's what the split mind is all about. Is God's up in the heaven and I'm down here in hell. That's the ego mind, the split mind. Comments, questions? Paragraph 6. It is impossible to communicate in alien tongues. You and your Creator can communicate through creation because that, and only that, is your joint will. A divided mind cannot communicate because it speaks for different things to the same mind. This loses the ability to communicate simply because confused communication does not mean anything. A message cannot be communicated unless it makes sense. How sensible can your messages be when you ask for what you do not want? Yet as long as you are afraid of your will, that is precisely what you are asking for. How sensible can your messages be when you ask for the ego illusion to be your reality? As long as you're afraid of your spiritual will, of God's will, that's precisely what you're asking for. You're asking for ego's will. And if you persist in asking for ego's will, well, that's what you're going to get. But that's insane thinking. And you will just stay caught in your insanity. Paragraph 7. You may insist that the Holy Spirit does not answer you, but it might be wiser to consider the kind of questioner you are. You do not ask only for what you want. This is because you are afraid you might receive it, and you would. This is why you persist in asking the teacher who could not possibly give you what you want. Of him, you can never learn what it is, And this gives you the illusion of safety. Yet you cannot be safe from truth, but only in truth. Reality is the only safety. Your will is your salvation because it is the same as God's. The separation is nothing more than the belief that it is different. Well, let's go over that paragraph again. You may insist that the Holy Spirit does not answer you, but it might be wiser to consider the kind of questioner you are. You do not ask only for what you want. I think the you here is your spiritual you. You do not ask only for what your spiritual self wants. In other words, you ask for what your ego self wants. And we're afraid, your ego self is afraid that you might receive it, might receive the spiritual reality. And you would if you asked Holy Spirit for that. But you persist in asking the teacher, the Holy Spirit, you persist in asking the teacher who could not possibly give you what you want. In other words, you persist in asking the ego. You turn to the ego to be your teacher. And the ego cannot possibly give you what you truly want. Of him, you can never learn what it is. Of the ego, you can never learn. But this gives you the illusion of safety, because that's what ego is all about, illusion. Yet you cannot be safe from truth, from spirit, but only in truth. You must be in spirit to be safe. Reality, the spiritual reality, is the only safety. Your spiritual will is your salvation because it is the same as God's. We just said that numerous times above. The separation of the split mind of operating in ego is nothing more than the belief that your will is different from God's will. But we're being told it isn't, because there's only one will, there's God's will, and that's the reality, that's the true truth. But ego wants you to think that you have a different will, a human will, an ego will, a body will. Questions, comments? Paragraph 8. No right mind can believe that its will is stronger than God's. If then a mind believes that its will is different from his, it can only decide either that there is no God or that God's will is fearful. The former accounts for the atheist and the latter for the martyr, who believes that God demands sacrifices. Either of these insane decisions will induce panic, because the atheist believes he is alone and the martyr believes that God is crucifying him. Yet no one really wants either abandonment or retaliation, even though they may seek both. Can you ask the Holy Spirit for gifts such as these and actually expect to receive them? He cannot give you something you do not want. When you ask the universal giver for what you do not want, you are asking for what cannot be given because it was never created. It was never created because it was never your will for you. It was never created because it was never God's will for you. I don't think that paragraph needs any further explanation. Number 9. Ultimately, everyone must remember the will of God, because ultimately everyone must recognize himself. This recognition is the recognition that his will and God's are one. In the presence of truth, there are no unbelievers and no sacrifices. In the security of reality, fear is totally meaningless. To deny what is can only seem to be fearful. Fear cannot be real without a cause, and God is the only cause. God is love, and you do want him. This is your will. Ask for this, and you will be answered, because you will be asking only for what belongs to you. Paragraph 10. When you ask the Holy Spirit for what would hurt you, he cannot answer, because nothing can hurt you. And so you are asking for nothing. Any wish that stems from the ego is a wish for nothing. And to ask for it is not a request. It is merely a denial in the form of a request. The Holy Spirit is not concerned with form, being aware only of meaning. The ego cannot ask the Holy Spirit for anything because there is complete communication failure between them. Yet you can ask for everything of the Holy Spirit because your requests to him are real, being of your right mind. Would the Holy Spirit deny the will of God? And could he fail to recognize it in his Son? We've been talking a lot about the will of God. Let's remind ourselves that the will of God is love, peace, joy, wisdom, prosperity, forgiveness. The will of God is all things beautiful and positive. That is the will of God. (11) You do not recognize the enormous waste of energy you expend in denying truth. What would you say if someone who persists in attempting the impossible, believing that to achieve it is to succeed? The belief that you must have the impossible in order to be happy is totally at variance with the principle of creation. God could not will that happiness depended on what you could never have. The fact that God is love does not require belief, but it does require acceptance. It is indeed possible for you to deny facts, although it is impossible for you to change them. If you hold your hands over your eyes, you will not see because you are interfering with the laws of seeing. If you deny love, you will not know it because your cooperation is the law of its being. You cannot change laws you did not make. And the laws of happiness were created for you, not by you. Any questions, comments? Paragraph 12. Any attempt to deny what is must be fearful. And if the attempt is strong, it will induce panic. Willing against reality, though impossible, can be made into a very persistent goal, even though you do not want it. But consider the result of this strange decision. If you are devoting your mind to what you do not want, how real can this devotion be? If you do not want it, it was never created. If it were never created, it is nothing. Can you really devote yourself to nothing? Can you really devote yourself to the ego? God, in his devotion to you, created you devoted to everything and gave you what you are devoted to. Otherwise, you would not have been created perfect. Reality is everything, and you have everything because you are real. You cannot make the unreal because the absence of reality is fearful, and fear cannot be created. As long as you believe that fear is possible, you will not create. Opposing orders of reality make reality meaningless, and reality is meaning. So reality is everything. Again, that spiritual reality is everything. And you have everything because you are real. So the only thing to ask Spirit for is the will of God be done through you. That you do the will of God, which means that you love and you are at peace and you are joy and you are good and you are forgiving. That's being the will of God. And not being afraid. Because as long as you believe that fear is possible, you can't create. And what do you want to create? Well, you want to create in like manner that God created. You want to create love. You want to create joy. You want to create peace. You want to create the will of God. That's what your true spiritual self wants. Unlike your ego self that wants all kinds of other illusionary things. And our last paragraph, 14. Remember then that God's will is already possible and nothing else will ever be. This is the simple acceptance of reality, because only that is real. You cannot distort reality and know what it is. And if you do distort reality, you will experience anxiety, depression, and ultimately panic, because you are trying to make yourself unreal. When you feel these things, do not try to look beyond yourself for truth. For truth can only be within you. Say, therefore, Christ is in me, and where he is, God must be, for Christ is part of him. So be it. Thus ends our reading for this evening. Questions, comments? Do you have any reflections on what we read tonight, David?
Well, it's all in there. You can only be your true self, your soul self. Anything else is disrupting to yourself and those around you.
Yes.
It seemed very simple, the whole thing. Just popped out. God is love and you do want him. Everybody needs to be loved. That's another bottom line I've learned in the course.
Yes, you know, the course is hundreds of pages, and yet it's all really very simple. It is.
Yet the concept of ego is hard for someone who hasn't studied the course. And I struggle between understanding of spirit and ego. You can't, you said that you can't have spirit if you're in ego. It's either one or the other.
What happens for most of us is we flip-flop between spirit mind and ego mind. And the objective is to be more in spirit mind than in ego mind. And that's just the way you think, When you look at somebody and you judge them and think, oh, they're fat, they're ugly, they're dirty, they're this and that, and what have you. Well, that's the ego mind. When you look at anybody, regardless of what they look like or what they're saying or what they're doing, and you say, there's a child of God equal unto me. There's only one of us. then you're operating in spirit mind. So that's the goal. The goal is to be vigilant and to constantly monitor your thoughts and see where you're thinking. If you're thinking thoughts of anger, you're in the ego mind. If you can think thoughts of forgiveness, then you're in the spirit mind. So the more that you think the spiritual way using spirit mind, the more you'll be immersed in spirit mind, and eventually the ego mind will just disappear. It'll let it go. It's like turning the light bulb on in a dark room. The darkness will dissipate. It won't be there anymore. There will only be light.
Today I was having a conversation with someone, and they're in ego mind, and they're trying to set me against the other person because of something they did in the past. And it popped into my mind that this was ego mind, that their hurt and anger has enveloped them, and so I says, I don't speak badly of people who have passed. They can't defend themselves, and they tried to pull me into the ego again, and I said, that's nothing I'm going to discuss, because
Good.
but it helps studying this every week.
Right. Yeah, that's good. That's a good example of learning how to think with spirit mind. Just, that's like being a conscientious objector. I refuse to fight. I'm the phrase I like to use is, I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to play ego's game. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes the best thing is to just be silent. If people are trying to get you to engage in obviously ego thinking and action and all, sometimes the best thing is to just be quiet, walk away, but in your mind, you're blessing them. You're saying, you don't know who you are, but I know who you are. You're a child of God, and I love you and I forgive you. And turn around and walk away, and just don't play that ego game with them.
I think they think that you're going to love them more if they get you to side with them.
Ah, good insight there. Yeah.
They're looking for love too,
Right.
and they're trying to suck you in. Told me, and it happened twice in a conversation, and I didn't let it happen.
Good.
I try not to create a separation between myself and them by my comments. I could easily do it by shoving it in their face
Right.
what they're doing, but it's enough that I'm aware of what they're doing and I'm not responding. So in the future, they may not try to go down that path.
And it's important that you're aware of what you're doing, and that you're aware of what you're thinking, and that you're aware of how you're reacting.
Yeah.
So, very good.
It's called waking up.
Yes.
Waking up is hard to do.
But eventually we all wake up. That's the promise.
Yeah, it comes down to death.
Yes.
Let us wake up when we die or near death.
Well, the goal is to wake up before you die.
That's right.
We
But-
should walk around with placards that say, "Wake up now! Wake up now!"
I try to awaken people. You know, I ask questions that might help jog them into a different type of thinking,
Hmm.
or just tell them I don't agree and just be quiet.
Yeah,
Well,
the course asks a lot of questions, and using that same technique. You know, paragraph 12, sentence 5. How real can this devotion be? It asks. Let me look back here. Paragraph 11, sentence 2. What would you say of someone who persists in attempting the impossible, believing that to achieve it is to succeed? You know, the Course asks a lot of these questions throughout the text, trying to get you to, oh, never thought about it that way.
what keeps us in ego?
Oh, well, we do. The way we think keeps us in ego. It's as simple as that. Well, the way we think, the way we feel, the things we say, the things we do, keep us in ego.
A bad habit.
Yes, a lot of bad habits. Well, all righty then. Why don't we take a few moments of silence, and we'll end our discussion for this evening.